Hello everybody, my name is Gene Sharp, and I have the pleasure of introducing the speakers at today's event. All of them have been Nobel laureates, all of them won the prize except for me. I'm the only person speaking today who has not received it. Sure, I'm disappointed, but having been a peace activist my whole life, I'm used to things turning out the way they should. And how can I be too depressed when there are so many indications that the revolutionaries for democracy in North Africa and the Middle East this spring have applied much of the advice appearing in my handbook, From Dictatorship to Democracy. Anyway, some of you may be thinking I'm here as a sort of token male, since after all, the dialogue is going to be among women mainly. Whatever the reason for my inclusion, I'm always ready to talk about peace. So to get that discussion started, I'll first introduce the elder stateswoman of the group, Bertha Von Suttner. Bertha was born to a wealthy family in Austria in 1843 and died in 1914, less than 2 months before the First World War broke out. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for Peace. She was not remarkable for her farsightedness. However, since she was certain that international arbitration, a new idea at the time, would bring about an end to the war in the 20th century, Yes, you heard right, the 20th century. Obviously, the joke is, it's the 21st century, we've had a lot of war. The second laureate who will be participating in today's discussion is Jane Addams. She was a U.S. activist who was born in 1860 and died in 1934. Jane was passionate and depressive by nature. She was also known for her ethical orientation and her humility. Although she founded the first settlement house in the United States and worked tirelessly with the poor and immigrants in an effort to broaden U.S. democracy, she was derided later in life for her pacifism and internationalism and was branded unpatriotic. The third laureate is Mother Teresa. Also known as the Saint of Calcutta. Mother Teresa was born in what is now Macedonia in 1910 and spent most of her life in India administering to the needs of the poorest of the world's poor. She died in 1997. Although the apostolary, hope I said that right, record suggests that she had lost her faith entirely by the end of her life, there is a strong movement among Catholics, including her close religious advisors, that she should be made a saint. The fourth laureate is Aung San Suu Kyi. Who was born in 1945. Last winter, she was released from house arrest in her native Burma after spending 15 of the prior 21 years in confinement. It's a long time. Suu Kyi is an implacably idealistic woman who has put the democratic aspirations of her people ahead of her own happiness or that of her family. She is driven to this type of sacrifice and leadership because of her admiration for her father. More about him later. Next up is Rigoberta Menchu, who may be the most controversial of our lawyers, as she didn't exactly advocate peaceful strategies for overcoming oppression. Rigoberta was born in 1959 as a member of the Quiche tribe of Guatemala, a group that was marked for genocide during Guatemala's 36-year civil war. Rigoberta advanced a mix of strategies, both rhetorical and military, to her followers and remained unapologetically supportive of the use of weapons in self-defense. Next is Wangari Maathai. She was born in Kenya in 1940 and as a young woman was brought to the United States during the Kennedy administration to attend college in Cambridge. She later received her master's degree and PhD and entered academia, I would say, and then political life at home. Wangari, like many of the laureates, suffered intense discrimination on account of her gender, but she has become a powerful political presence at home, nonetheless, and has founded the Green Belt movement, which empowers people all around the globe to reclaim their lives and cultures through conversation of the natural environment. And last, but certainly not least, is Shirin Ebadi. She is the last woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. She was born soon after the Second World War in 1947 and is somehow still alive. Although the government... I like that, actually. That was a good sentence. Although the government of Iran had marked her for assassination at one time. Shirin is a lawyer and was a judge in Iran before the revolution and is now an outspoken advocate for those around the world whose human rights are being violated. She lives in exile in the United Kingdom, where she remains a faithful Muslim. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy our discussion. And I'm Gene Sharp.
How wonderful that this last winter you were released from house arrest by the Burmese government, Suu Kyi. How long have you been detained at that point?
My most recent house arrest began 7 years ago, Jane, following an attempt on my life during the Bubayan massacre.
I can't imagine being under house arrest, separated from nature for so long.
Of the past 21 years, I've spent 15 under house arrest, but there were always ways to pass in the time. Before my husband died of prostate cancer, I read books he sent me during his exile, or I chatted with household staff or played the piano. Honestly, what was hardest for me was not being separated from nature, or even from my family, but being separated from the people of Burma. When General Ne Win stepped down in 1988, hundreds of thousands of lovers of freedom in Burma called for political transformation. Unfortunately, this led to redoubled repression, including one of my house arrests.
Was there no way out?
Unjust Burmese laws were used against me, and the new government held me for 5 years before I even went to trial. Had I agreed to leave the country at any time, they would have been happy to see me go, and I could have then been reunited with my family. But my family was fully united with me in solidarity with the people of Burma.
I sympathize with the problem of dealing with unjust government. My crimes, like yours, Suu Kyi, have been political, and I think we can both rest our case on that.
If only our leaders were not bent on using their powers to verify.
I remember when I was taken to an infamous prison on a trumped-up offense and could not stop laughing. The guards asked me if I had been brought there for a moral offense. That is, they were asking me if I was a prostitute, since the women who arrived there after dark usually were. No, I said, laughing uncontrollably. My offense is political. It's hard to explain, but there's an Iranian joke whose punchline is just that. My offense is political. I kept repeating my offense is political until I was hysterical. Eventually, the guards turned away in disgust because I could not compose myself. I wonder if there has ever been a woman in the political sphere who has not been accused of being a prostitute, that is, if she shows any inclination to leadership. When a woman leaves the private sphere and walks out into the streets, that makes her, does it not, in the minds of many men and women, a woman without morality?
Traditions die hard.
They do indeed. Perhaps the key lies, as you suggest, with the family as much as with the government. As an Iranian woman born in 1947, I was very fortunate that my brother and father treated my mother and sister and I as their equals. Because there was no substantial gender discrimination in our household, I have not been able to accept uncritically the suffering that so many Iranian women endure under Iran's current government.
Looking back, Shirin, I must admit that my childhood was perfectly normal for a woman of my time. It was in Prague that my printer was set. My mother quickly moved us to Berlin, however. I can still see myself standing by the window, 5 years old, looking down into the great square where a noisy throng and wild commotion. A new word struck upon my ear. Revolution! But there was no more to it than that. The word had no meaning to me. Thus was my first experience of a historic event. If I look back to my youth, I do not see myself as one person altering over time, but as many diverse girl forms, none of which is obviously related to the other. The only central they share is a concern for pleasure and fame, plans for artistic career and for marriage, of course, domesticity and a lack of interest in the events of the day. An entire war in which the blood of thousands was shed is disposed of with one line in my diary. The event was unimportant means of the volcano had erupted in the West Indies.
My childhood was both unusual and conventional in its own ways. I was baptized Agnes Bonshaw Bogakshu in an Ottoman town that is now Skopje, Macedonia. My mother decided to raise me as a Roman Catholic when my father died. I was 8 then, and can remember being fascinated by stories of the lives of missionaries and their services. At 12, I was convinced that I should commit myself to the religious life. And when I was 18, I left home to become a missionary. I wanted to go out and speak the life of Christ to those who needed it most. My first step was a journey to Ireland to join the Laureates sisters and learn English. After this, I would never see my mother again. May the Lord bless her and keep her. However, I never doubted that my journey would be an expression of the will of God.
From childhood, my people in Kiche, Guatemala, are taught that suffering is our fate. Kiche children are taught that it is our duty to be respectful and live through our pain. My parents explained to me that whatever my ambitions happen to be, they could never be achieved. That, they said, was how life was. They said that my life would never change. It would go on the same. Work, poverty, suffering, just as their lives had, and then I would die. For this reason, as an adult, I decided not to marry or have children. I had seen hundreds of deaths by then. I didn't want to be a widow or a mother broken by the misery of her children. Many of my compañeros had already had to give their children away. Even though I was engaged, I knew I had to choose between the compañera and my struggle, and I chose the struggle.
Like you, Rigoberta, my experiences growing up influenced all my later political actions, whether I understood it then or not. I was the third of 6 children and the first girl after 2 sons. I was born in 1940 in a small village of the Hippie in the central highlands of what was then British Kenya. My grandparents and parents were also born in this region, near the provincial capital of Mightier, in the foothills of the Aberdare Mountains. At the time, the land around the Hippie was still lush, green, and fertile. The people lived from the soil and kept cattle, goats, and sheep. The seasons were regular and clean drinking water was abundant, but the European missionaries who had come at the end of the 19th century had been followed by traders and administrators who soon introduced new methods of exploiting our natural resources. Practices like logging, clear-cutting native forests, establishing plantations of imported trees, hunting wildlife, and undertaking extensive commercial agriculture. Eventually, the local people became insensitive to or even welcomed the destruction, accepting it as a sign of progress. Few understood the necessity of resisting at that time.
I too came from a large family. I was born in 1860 in the state of Illinois in the United States and was the youngest child of 8. By the time I had become a teenager, only 4 of us remained. Losing my siblings to illness was hard on the family, but it was common in those days and we struggled through it. I was expected to grow up quickly, as my mother died when I was 2 and my father had high expectations of me always.
It was not until I was older that I realized how gender equality had been impressed on me first and foremost at home, by example. It was only when I surveyed my own sense of place in the world from an adult perspective that I saw how my upbringing had spared me from the low self-esteem and learned dependence that I observed in women reared in traditional Iranian homes.
I think that it was being raised in a village as I was, by a strong mother and indulgent father, surrounded by an extended family and a loving community, that allowed me to find the confidence to help start the Green Belt movement. Trees, what profound symbols of life and solidarity of humans and nature. How often we look at all trees and reflect upon our childhoods. Those who raised me are responsible for the Green Belt Revolution, which was led to women all over Africa and beyond, planting millions and millions of trees.
I too was fortunate enough to be taught to act responsibly in the world, and not long after I graduated from Oxford College, where I'd been raised in a well-to-do rural family, I felt a burning desire to live with the poor. In London, I witnessed a settlement house called Toynbee Hall, where graduates of college mingled respectfully with the poor, and through this mingling, learned about the conditions under which most of the world lives. This utopian vision was burned upon my mind's eye and led to my decision to start such a house in Chicago. Poverty and ignorance are products of nothing else of an environment that reflects the negligence of those who have the power to prevent them.
Those who have power always want more. We must teach our children to embrace different goals altogether.
Well, I can't speak too much at length about my background for fear of taking away time from the testimony of these wonderful peace activists I get to share the stage with today. However, just so our audience knows, I'm not here for the pizza. Never mind. Other than I'm just not here for whatever. I was born and raised in Ohio. My upbringing involved some religion, insofar as my father was a minister. I was a political young man, and in college I majored in political science at Ohio State. I went to get my master's at Ohio State in sociology, and went to Oxford to get my PhD in political theory. I founded the Albert Einstein Institution in 1943 after being inspired by the success of nonviolent struggles. The center promotes nonviolent resolutions to conflict as a means of providing a fight against injustice that will never have one sacrificing the moral argument for peace. I was inspired by the writings of Henry David Thoreau and also Muhammad Gandhi.